Hello and welcome back to Podcasting as Praxis. I'm David and my pronouns are he and him.
I'm Jamie and my pronouns are he and him.
Hi, I'm Rob and my pronouns are he and him.
And I'm Alistair and my pronouns are he and him. And it sounds really bad when you lay them all out like that. James, come back to us, please.
Yeah, rip diversity. So we're all here, minus James, who is unfortunately busy. But we'll return in the bonus episode, I think is the next one out that should have James in. So we've got a couple of little news articles, and then we're going to embark on a two-parter, so that you can get the second part of this if you enjoy it, on the Patreon once it's out. But Rob, what before we get into the topic of central banking, I don't know how to make that sound more exciting.
I've got my Economics 101 textbook out, so I'm ready.
Excellent.
Honestly, I don't know why I did this, but, here we are. It's too late to stop recording. Anyway, first thing I wanted to talk about was the not at all funny and very serious and needs to be condemned by everybody mob of slightly deranged, I think, anti-vax, anti-Jimmy Savile people yelling at Keir Starmer about said Jimmy Savile, Julian Assange, and various, which has just been endlessly entertaining so far as I'm concerned.
I'm gonna say this right now, like calling them anti-vaxxers and stuff like that, and at the same time calling them anti-Jimmy Savile people is an insult to anti-Jimmy Savile people like me.
Yeah, you don't want to be lumped in the same boat.
Correct. This is just fucking beautiful, isn't it? This whole fucking thing, just chef's kiss. You'd love to see it. Like Johnson said, technically nothing incorrect. Like, he simply implied a timeline of some events which occurred, not necessarily linked, and that's it. Wow. That's all they had to do.
I think you'll find, David, that according to factcheck.briefcase, that it's not true and it shouldn't be said.
Oh, so it's not true that Keir Starmer was in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service when Jimmy Savile was being investigated?
Well, I think you'll find that is true, but the decision-making powers...
I guess 4 out of 5 Pinocchios, unfortunately.
Nothing goes down well on the doorstep. Like, yes, but...
Yeah.
We'd love to see it. Enjoy doing that, Labour people. Love it.
I have to say,
guys. It's going to be great.
It's been so great because, this has been so obviously on the cards forever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we said it was going to happen.
It was a thing people were fucking throwing at him in 2019. Do you know what I mean? It was Labour are bad because Corbyn hates the Jews was what you heard from Baz on the street. But then they would also say, that Starmer hates fucking Britain and wants us back in the EU, the second referendum, and he fucking didn't, he let Jimmy Savile go. Do you know what I mean? And it was obviously only a matter of time. You can't, but the centrists just, you know what I mean? Blair won a landslide in 97, and as far as they're concerned, that is the only thing that has ever happened in all of history. Do you know what I mean? There's no room in their tiny brains for any other facts or events or memories. Mm-hmm. It's just, no, we are eternally popular. So it never occurred to them that spending 5 years building a fucking media machine that was entirely weaponized against the leader of the Labour Party would ever come back to bite them when their guy was leader of the Labour Party, because everyone loves them. Do you know what I mean? Everyone loves fucking Blair and the centrists and the sensible fucking suit wearing cunts that are in charge. There was no reason why anyone would ever fucking direct the media against made up slurs on them.
Yeah, I mean, the funniest part of this is they could have just avoided all this by just being outright cunts and not being shit at it. Had they just really fucking piled in, they could have probably avoided most of the bullshit that they're getting. It's constantly being reported on, and it's constantly being reported on as we know this isn't true, and we are very loudly going to repeat the allegation to say that it wasn't true, so that you've all heard the allegation.
All the Labour front bench and half their com staff going literally just repeating Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile in the same sentence over and over again, and with but it's not true, and it's how do you not understand the very basics of what you're fucking doing? It's what?
Well, because like, you know, the most important thing to them is that like the fucking referee, whoever that is, I think at this moment it's the Speaker of the House, is it, that they're all like crying to? But the important thing is that the referee recognizes that like decorum was breached and should be restored. Do you know what I mean? It's like fucking it's the perfect thing to say about like Keir Starmer if you wanted like to just like throw that grenade and then watch like as all of his fucking like allies just like, you know what I mean, like heaped explosives on it to try and like stop it from going off. Do you know what I mean? Because they're incapable, absolutely fucking incapable of just going, yeah, I'm not rising to that. Do you know what I mean? Because how dare he say a thing that wasn't true against a person who like, you know, like fucking loves the country and loves his majesty and like fucking hates like benefits claimants and like rioters. Do you know what I mean? It's just, obviously they were always going to do this because they're incapable of not. Do you know what I mean? It will not. They cannot leave it alone because it was a breach of protocol.
And the great thing is though that it's like as David said, it's like it's kind of true in a way, but not obviously specifically true, but certainly more true than all of the shit that all of the people currently losing their minds at the moment about this. Lost their minds over one Jeremy Corbyn and the things that he is alleged to have done or said.
I mean, if
that he's laid and so on and so forth.
I mean, if we're doing like 6 degrees of Jimmy Savile, like this is a lot more true than like Jeremy Corbyn laid a wreath at a Hamas shrine or whatever that was fuck was supposed to be, right? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the specifics of it don't matter. Like the point is, all of these fucking dipshits happily like. Do you know what I mean? Happily, like, chipped in their fucking labour and their support to build a giant fucking rig that hung the sword of Damocles above the Labour leader, and are now like surprised when like it's still there and like the people in charge of it like they won't take it apart. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like, no, you built us this weapon for like fucking tormenting the Labour leader, and we quite like it. We're gonna keep it.
It's
you
fun.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't care that the Labour leader is now your guy. Thanks for the help, though.
It's been real good. Bye. Yeah, no, it's unbelievable.
Well, some of the worst people that you know are now in the finding out stage, which is good, and we'd love to see that.
It is.
But like it was always so obvious, but they were completely blind to it because, like I say, the only fact they're capable of like holding in their minds is that like 1997 was eternal. Do you know what I mean? And that everyone loves the fucking like the briefcase wing of Labour like nothing else. Do you know what I mean? Despite the fact that, as often noted, a fucking horse could have won that election in 1997. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You could have like painted a face on a sack of brick dust and just hurled it across like the fucking TV screens of the nation, and they'd all have gone, "Yeah, that looks better than Major." Do you know what I mean? And like fucking But
my favorite gag at the My favourite gag at the moment is that apparently the new line from the Tories and from Boris's office is that if the Prime Minister can be on the receiving end for weeks of allegations about parties, then applying the same logic, it should be legitimate to ask about the failures of the CPS when it was led by Keir Starmer.
Not to be by your own logic by the fucking Prime Minister at number 10.
Wait. Honestly, by fucking by my horrible journey for commentariat later, I wandered onto the Spectator and found an article in which someone had said, like, had fully written an article in defence of Boris Johnson from the vicious and untrue attack by Keir Starmer, and it was like one fucking part of a line where Starmer said like Johnson ruins everything and everyone that he ever gets involved with or some shit, and like this was just a step too far for the Spectator. And
was the answer like no, at least one of his children is still speaking to him, don't worry about it, he didn't ruin all the lives. I did not fucking read through the full thing. I skimmed it for goodness and couldn't find anything. It wasn't funny enough to include.
Nothing good in the Spectator. Wow.
I know, right? Fucked up. But yeah, no, it's just like they'll happily turn it around on that and just not bother analysing anything because, again, it's a useful thing. And this is the funniest part about it all is that this isn't even all they've got. This is like a taster. This is just like this is the Czech spy level shit we're on. That's all this is.
This is plate number 1 in a 5-plate course of let's see how much we could just fucking run this Jimmy Savile shit into the fucking ground. If they can go and lose their fucking minds as hard as they did over, Jeremy Corbyn's going to tax your mum out of her house and home and all that shit. They're gonna just the sky's the fucking limit. Like I said, absolute fucking taster of what's gonna happen if a general election comes around and Keir Starmer's still fucking leader. Good fucking luck to you.
Just wait until
what they're listening out for is war boys.
You say if Keir Starmer is still leader, but really does not matter.
No, you are right.
Boris Johnson could be leader of the Labour Party at the next general election, and he would still get both barrels about being a fucking communist who hates Britain. You know what I mean?
I promise you, some people in the Daily Express are writing columns that basically say that.
Yeah.
Oh fucking hell! What was it? Oh no, I'm thinking of what's his face calling Keir Starmer a fucking communist, and us looking back on this as the golden age.
Hitchens.
Yeah, Hitchens. Yeah,
King.
I mean, look forward to more of that as well.
He's always been like that, so I'm fine with Hitchens doing that. Like that's
listen, you can't comment on Hitchens because Hitchens actually operates in a different
time
zone entirely. Yeah, just like an entirely different temporal reality for 6 months of the year. So you can't possibly conceive what he's doing until we switch back into the same time zone as him.
Well, shall we swiftly move on and revisit something we talked about recently, actually, because the first annual financial statements are out from the Captain Tom Foundation, and they made for some great reading.
Oh, good.
I'm sure everything.
Old friends.
I'm sure that everything's above board. All the money's been distributed to worthy causes, and the NHS has been saved. The privatisation has been reversed. Waiting times are down, more doctors, more nurses, less sick people, more handsome sick people, more handsome doctors, etc.
All the staff and the personnel have been sent one and only one can of sad AF beer. Yeah, now everything's been resolved.
Remember when everyone on the NHS got a fucking pin for working through the fucking COVID pandemic?
Jesus Christ,
that was pretty cool, wasn't it? And all the pans and all that. Fucking great.
Love to wear flair to my hospital.
Have you not seen the gratitude is continuing? Have you not seen this fucking the thank holiday?
The what?
Is that thanking British Airways?
No. This is the call for a new bank holiday, but it's a thank holiday so that we can thank all the staff.
Why does it have to be so fucking kitschy?
Yes. Do you know the best bit is they're trying to drum it into actual public consciousness this year by rolling it in with the fucking Jubilee bank holiday.
Well,
so you're kind of forced to celebrate the thank holiday at the same time. Oh, it's fucking tragic. I hate it. I hate all of this.
Anyway, so briefly back to the Captain Tom Foundation. They raised over just under 1.1 million, spent 160k of that money distributed evenly between 4 charities, but then spent 230k on itself and management fees. So they spent much more on managing 1.1 million than they did on the charities it was supposed to set out, including, and these are my favourite bits, they spent £54,000 on the following 2 entities, 16,000 quid to Club Nook Limited.
That's fucking Animal Crossing, isn't it?
Yeah. Which is controlled by...
A raccoon broke in and stole £16,000.
So Tom Nook Limited is controlled by Captain Tom's daughter Helen Ingram Moore, who we talked a lot about on the podcast episode, for accommodation and transport for the captain around the UK when he was promoting this thing. And the other 38k was paid to the Matrix Group. That's the main office run by Helen and David Ingram Moore, who is a family trustee for life of the foundation.
See, working for the Matrix Group is a lot like waking up from the Matrix.
which included £5,000 for the website of the Captain Tom Foundation. And for those of you so inclined, you can go have a look at the Captain Tom Foundation website and tell me, is this money well spent? And I would say probably not. They spent some more money. So in total, they spent 162k on management costs, which is just amazing. And it got even better because Helen Ingram Moore did an interview in some kind of financial or charity magazine or something, where she was asked,
It was like
what was the best...
moneyexpert.com or something, wasn't it?
It was something like that, yeah. Where she was asked...
Oh, sorry. I love the idea of, like, you know, I run a charity, so I go and talk to money expert, and that's where, like, things like consultancy fees and stuff will be discussed.
So yeah.
Getting huge vibes of like that MP who charged like 58p or whatever to his expenses to take a taxi like half a mile.
So when asked what was the best year of your financial life, Helen answered, it was 2020.
Excuse me, the financial life?
Yeah.
She basically came out and went like, oh yeah, at the start of the pandemic, business was like on the rocks, and we didn't know what we were going to do for money. And then we had the idea, what if we made my like fucking like 100-year-old dad like wander around the garden for money
and whip £1 coins at him?
And then suddenly, like everything was all right again, and it's like weird. You seem to have skipped a bit there. Why did your dad doing all this for charity suddenly make you like financially secure?
Yeah,
seems like an odd thing to leave out.
I have the quote here, which is just frankly bizarre. We'd had to cancel his 100th birthday party because of COVID. So my husband suggested that instead of the party, my father should walk around the garden 100 times, and we would give him £1 per lap.
What possesses?
That's the best part. It wasn't even for charity. It was just like, wouldn't it be funny to just watch this like old guy wander around the garden for money?
What possesses someone of sound mind to put into like presumably some kind of national publication that this is a normal thing to do?
Yeah. What shall we do to entertain Grandad today? I don't know. Let's
torture him.
£1 coins at his head.
Let's go Harry Brown on his ass.
Yeah, I like the idea that they were just throwing the coins like he was a fucking goalie or something. Do you know what I mean?
Treat him like an enormous 2p machine.
So there was one more small detail in the financial statements that caught my eye. They laid out some ambitions for the coming years, and because we were just talking about the Day of Thanks, they have another. The Captain Tom Foundation has a new idea, an ambition even. They want to launch a global fundraising event called Captain Tom Day, which will celebrate the wit and wisdom of our wonderful older generation. Now, if you're thinking, what in Christ's name would a day like that look like? Well, Captain Tom Foundation
would it look like every day on Twitter? Do you know what I mean?
Rob,
would it be like one day of the year where people are legally obliged to listen to all the like 100-year-old fucks telling you, yeah, I bought my house for 1 6 shillings. Why can't you just go without coffee for a week?
And Rob, riddle me this: would you consider it wise to perhaps go on an international holiday in the middle of a pandemic before having had a vaccination against the virus in said pandemic? Because I don't consider that necessarily wise.
It's wit and wisdom, so really what he was doing there was something.
he was doing it ironically.
Yeah, that was covered under wit.
Yeah, he was doing it for a bit. No, let me quote.
Talk about dedication to the
bit. Let me quote for you from the document. In a Children in Need style celebration, Britain's invisible army will be championed to showcase their talents and experiences.
Right. Okay. Sorry. What is the invisible army? Is this old people?
Old people.
Oh, I thought it was an actual invisible army. You know what I mean? Like there's Do you know what I mean? Foreign countries where just a bunch of like school children are just spontaneously dead from machine gun bullets, and it's like the invisible army strikes again. It's when you do an airstrike with Wonder Woman's jet. That's the invisible air force.
Oh, fucking hell. Oh, shit. So this is basically just going to be like a really depressing talent show, but with budget.
Yes. It'll be the Captain Tom talent show.
I do like the admission, though, of like in a children in need style celebration. So not addressing the causes, only the symptoms, which is like always something to aspire to.
I think what they mean when they say children in need style event is they get to be on telly.
Yeah.
Oh my god, these people love being on fucking TV, don't they?
Yeah.
They live for that shit.
Isn't the grandson on Love Island or something along those lines at the moment?
Yeah, some like nth degree
reality show.
like relation. Yeah, is on some fucking reality shit.
Oh, we're all on some reality shit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I keep insisting, get me off.
Champion 1-0.
Anyway, speaking of the sad reality
Steady now,
of modern British life, I have bring good tidings to you because the government has solved the energy crisis and specifically how you're going to pay for it. So, congratulations.
It's not more debt, is it?
Well, like, would you call it debt? It's not really debt, you know.
Rishi's in the room with us now.
Yeah, I mean, let me literally quote Rishi Sunak. You shouldn't view it as debt. It's 200 quid off your bill, and there's no interest charged on that.
Don't consider it a debt. Consider it an asset.
The 200 quid you've got, you just put that aside and probably make a little bit more money and just pay 40 quid back a year over a period of 5 years starting in 2023. So, you know, problem solved. Dust.
Rob,
have you considered investing the £200 that you've saved? Fucking hell!
Isn't it
like
like
NFT?
The way things are going, like do you know what I mean? They are actually the 200 quid you pay back in like 5 installments or whatever is probably going to be worth a lot less than the 200 quid they give you off your bill this year.
Yeah. That is probably true. Like, you might actually get some savings out of this purely because of inflation. But
so,
you know.
maybe that's why they've decided that, like, you know what I mean, every household gets this 200 quid off no matter what, and then like every single householder has to pay the 200 quid back.
I don't think
if they didn't get it off.
I was going to say, I don't think the 200. Not every household gets the 200 quid off, and
no, they don't.
I saw, and I saw something about like if you live in like an HMO or something like that, if you move out, like how does that work? Like that immediately, like you start going, how's this?
How does that work? How does that work? You pay it back. That's how that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's the long and the short of it, isn't it?
Well, I mean, what you definitely cannot do is opt out if you don't want this or if it doesn't apply to you. It is just going to be put into your account and then taken out over a period of 5 years, whether or not you want it or not. But there are two like specific categories that can get fucked. It's essentially the first one is if you live in a big apartment block or something, and you pay your heating bill to whoever owns the apartment block. You won't get a discount because that apartment block's contract with the energy provider is a commercial contract and not a residential contract, and those are not covered under this agreement. So you are still getting hosed. And
they're also exempt from the. They're also exempt from like the price cap, aren't they?
Yes,
commercial...
they are. Yep. And the other one is if you're a renter, it's incredibly unclear because if you pay your landlord for gas and electricity instead of paying it yourself, then your landlord may well make off with the money. And the good news is the Treasury has literally admitted it has no data on how many renters pay for energy in their own name versus how many pay it through the rent.
Excuse me, Mr. Sunak. So these people, who like quite a large proportion of people who are going to be affected by this, how many? Do you know how many is going to? It's actually how much damage it's going to do to their finances. It's like fuck if I know. Just like
actually, the problem was the premise of the question because you implied that rentals were people.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first mistake, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is though, if you were Chancellor of the Exchequer, why would you bother to like fucking like do this properly or look into things?
That's true.
Do you know what I mean? You know, you can just say, oh, it's 200 quid off your bills, and then like people go, right, and you go, and then you pay it back in 5 installments, and people look at it and go, well, doesn't this imply? And it's like, no further questions. Do you know what I mean? Because like the press aren't going to fucking check. They aren't going to like show any interest in it whatsoever.
Well, he was fucking pulled up with that pricky fucking Martin Lewis, fuck that guy. But he pulled him up to his fucking bail credit, I suppose. And like the response was, it's not a loan, it's a negative levy. Followed by 5 smaller levies. It's like,
Whomst among us does not
correct,
enjoy a
but,
negative
yeah, okay.
levy?
Yeah, I know. It's fucking bullshit, like, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it's also very time sensitive, so it's very well timed, because you get this 200 quid off in October, but this is after your electricity bills go up by over 50% in April, and another 10% up because of the rise in national insurance. So, like,
Is that
don't worry
good?
about it. Yeah, I mean, like, look, in a couple months later, you'll have 200 quid. So, you know, on the expectation of future wealth, you can go to IKEA in April and buy a new couch.
Yeah. No one pay any attention to how much you're already in credit on your account, by the way. Like, don't bother looking at that. You're already hundreds of pounds in credit, probably.
Yeah.
Basically, everyone fucking is at the moment because they've been taking way more than they fucking need to. So, yeah, £200 extra there. You're not going to notice it.
And in that same interview, Martin Lewis did ask Sunak, like, why they just going to make the energy companies pay for it, because, like, they're posting like insane record profits this year, and Sunak legitimately said, like, without crying in laughter, that he said he was worried that this would deter further investment in more North Sea oil and gas fields, because like that's what.
Oh, I'm so glad we've got a guy who understands the economy of supply and demand in charge of the economy.
Yeah, I know.
Fuck me. Oh, that's fucking fantastic. And this at the same time where France just told the energy companies, shut the fuck up. Like, even fucking Macron would fucking do that shit, and we don't even get that much.
Well,
this is what we fucking get for refusing to drive a JCB through the fucking Houses of Parliament like the French would.
Yeah.
No, we merely drive the JCB through small styrofoam bricks that say Brexit or some shit. Like,
yeah. We get a tiny little hammer that says blue wall.
oh, I hate this fucking place. I can't wait until it slips into the sea where it belongs.
But, you know, there's an even scarier phantom on the horizon. And
There's
it is,
a spectre haunting Europe.
Yes, and it's called dread inflation. Let me quote you a little bit from an interview between the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, and the BBC's Faisal Islam. Faisal, are you trying to get into people's heads and ask them not to ask for too high a pay rise? Governor of the Bank of England. Broadly, yes. Really? Why? We do need to see a moderation in wage rises. That's painful. Now, essentially,
because if there's one thing we can take away from the past 40 years of economy, it's that wages have risen too fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
You listening at home, you fat cat fuck with your regular pay rises. Fuck you. You made the line unhappy. Specifically, it's your fault.
Frankly, the idea of asking for an annual increase in salary that's higher than the rate of inflation is disgusting to me, and anyone who thinks that they deserve more than, well, I suppose it's 7% now, scum of the earth.
If you were like good and you were doing your bit for Britain, you would ask for a pay cut, because that way you too can fight inflation.
We're all in this together, or so I'm told.
Oh, I mean, there absolutely will be people that fucking do that, I imagine. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's exactly the kind of like fucking headbanger shit that the like Queen and Country lot live for. You know what I mean? It's like there'll be plenty of fucking like boomer dipshits who are already well off enough that they can afford to take a pay cut, and they'll do it and then use that as one more thing to fucking like club the youth with. Do you know what I mean? Like I took 5% less home from my job in a bank, You know what I mean? Like fucking why aren't these people at McDonald's? Why are these people at McDonald's striking for higher pay? You know what I mean?
Yeah, even though my real money
wait.
is in my bonuses and my stock options, which are untaxed or very lightly taxed in the first place, but we're not talking about them. This is, of course, like this demand for wage moderation is, of course, coming straight after the Bank of England itself projected that, given all the tax rises and the cost of energy and everything, most people will already experience a 2% drop in post-tax income this year. So you asking for more money, even though you genuinely have less, is disgusting. You disgust me, you listeners. Just sitting there with your money in your house with your heating on.
It's just exhausting, really, isn't it? Like, the guy who's meant to... Presumably this guy's meant to know something about the economy. I mean, how much is this guy paid again? It's like £500,000 a year, right?
Yeah, something like that. 580, I think, I want to say.
Wonder how much his pay is going to go up this year.
Well, I mean, he doesn't honestly need it. He'll just wait until he's retired and then he just goes to work for BlackRock for like an obscene amount of money. I think George Osborne at some point was getting like $2 million a month or something from BlackRock, wasn't it? If memory serves.
The system works.
The system works. Well, essentially, this leads us very nicely into part one of tonight's main story. And I don't know why I did this to myself, because I thought, this is interesting to talk about, and then I started really into it. So I wanted to talk about central banking and sort of part of the reason why the economy is as... so if you really like your technical economics and, a dearth of jokes and essentially just me doing endless talking.
I see David's managed to get his hand on the notes, because the first part in this segment is, why are we talking about this?
So essentially I wanted to talk to us about this for a host of reasons, essentially because central banking is incredibly critical to understanding the modern economy and why it is as stupid as it is, and also why the dividing line between the real economy, with people with real jobs, the stuff we were just talking about, and the continued inflation of the stock rise is as huge as it is, can at least in part only be explained through the stock market. And you cannot understand...
Rob is finally going to tell us why money is fake.
Yes. But on the other hand, I will not be telling you to instead invest your money in crypto, because it's not controlled by the central bank.
Everyone's investing in podcasts. Invest in this podcast right now. Invest now.
This is not investment advice.
Yeah, one day your Patreon subscription could be worth so much more.
We may do more content.
Yeah, essentially, you cannot really understand the modern economy or the modern stock market without seeing what's happened in
first suffering banking. A huge head injury.
And also suffering a huge head injury. And also, if you want to become one of the squid conspiracy people who end up yelling at Keir Starmer about Jimmy Savile, who think that there's a few people actually in control of the world, you would probably not be that far off the mark by saying it's the heads of the central banks of the Western world and China. You're not far off the money on that
Steady
one.
on cue.
In particular, there's a meeting of a group of 8 people inside the U.S. Federal Reserve called
You need to call it a shadowy cabal, Rob.
Sorry,
please.
yeah.
Can you get the language right? Thank you.
Yeah, let me try that again. In particular, a shadow cabal of 8 people inside the U.S. Federal Reserve called the Federal Open Market Committee, or the Doomsday Committee, might well in abstract be the 8 people who rule the world, or at least steer it forward.
And this shadowy cabal is like a complete mystery, and no one knows who any of these people are, right?
Oh no, you can just go on the website and find
exactly, them. Yeah, because it's not a massive conspiracy, and it's actually just the way that shit works.
Yes, exactly. So to me, essentially,
they put it out in plain view so that you won't think it's a conspiracy, but it totally is. It's totally the Illuminati. They just tell you up front everything that they're going to do, so that when you tell people, "Hey, the Illuminati are doing this shit," everyone laughs at you.
That's why it's a shadow cabal. You're distracted by the shadow cabal. Well, the Illuminati is illuminating everything behind you so that you can see the shadow cabal. That's how it works.
It's Plato's cave, but for morons. Yeah. So, like, to me, this is what the stuff that the central banks have been doing since. Well, we're going to get into the whole history of the thing, but since a long time is essentially one of the mechanisms that's ruled modern finance, which has gotten like somewhat more crazy since 1987, even more crazy since 2008, and since Corona.
What events were happening in the late 80s that could precipitate something like this? Would a certain USSR have anything to do with this?
No, not necessarily. This was mainly to do with a certain banking crisis in the US. But I promise you, when the story starts chronologically, we will start in 1987. So sit down and have fun with this. So a couple of caveats.
If you open your textbooks to page 104.
Or open your colouring books, get your crayons out.
That's more my speed.
Yeah, so a couple of caveats. Some of this will be a bit techie. I apologise beforehand, so I've done my best not to get too lost in the weeds. Number two, I'm very much like not an economist, so I'm liable to get some shit wrong. And everything and anything I say will have like...
It doesn't stop economists, Rob, let's be honest.
No, exactly. So yeah, everything I say has like a zillion asterisks, and none of it is as simple as I will make it out to be.
Is it any brackets around it though, Rob? That's the real question.
Fucking hell. Oh dear.
But if you want to read and like get into this stuff yourself because you have a brain injury, or you want to meet like me, which is also the same as having a brain injury, you can read Adam Tooze's magnificent Crashed and Shutdown, the second which I read over the Christmas break, Christopher Leonard's Lords of Easy Money, and pretty much everything in the Financial Times. So, have fun with that if you really want to.
The only Praxis Cast endorsed fucking newspaper is the Times.
The Financial Times.
The Financial Times, not the Times.
Not the Times.
Oh, not the Times.
On the other hand, the
If you
Times
ever
has
wanted to know what
furnished
makes Rob tick and why he's the way that he is, this is why.
So, first off, a very basic primer on what central banking is and how it works. Essentially, I'll be talking a lot more about the US Federal Reserve than I will be about the UK Central Bank in particular, or the EU Central Bank. They're very different institutions, but in their basic functionality, they're the same. In terms of why I'm talking more about the US Federal Reserve is because the US Federal Reserve prints the dollar, and the dollar is the thing that rules the world, together with the treasuries and the bonds that are issued by the US government. So central banks, first off, are the only institution in the world that can legitimately create money out of thin air, which is... that's the main thing they do. Banks can also do it on a smaller scale, but there has to be balance on the balance sheet against something. They can create new money to give you a mortgage, but the other side of that is that you have to repay the mortgage. So there's a backing in fractal terms, but there is a backing behind it.
It's also disappointing though that the Federal Reserve resolutely refuses to print money for good things.
Well, I mean it's an interesting question because, like, while these institutions are incredibly powerful, they are very limited in terms of what they can actually do in practice, or at least what they've done so far. Although that's gotten progressively crazier over the years, what they've allowed themselves to do. It's hard for, like, the way these things are set up. It's very hard for them to, like, pick specific ideas or say we're going to invest in climate change because of the way they're structured, because the way they run the world is through monetary policy instead of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is tax and stuff. That's what the government does. Fiscal policy is what the central government does, which is essentially they try to, depending on the mandate they have, but most central banks have a double mandate of high employment and keeping inflation down. And they do this typically by fiddling with the rate of interest that they give. Very broadly speaking, when interest rates go down, borrowing becomes a lot cheaper. So consumers and businesses go out with that borrowed money and do things. They, buy a couch or start a new business, which theoretically makes the economy bigger, which makes more activity happen, which creates economic booms and prosperity. When rates go up, borrowing becomes more expensive, saving becomes more attractive, so more money pulls out of the active economy and into savings accounts, and that causes business. There's less loaning about because it's more expensive to borrow money, and therefore the economy contracts a little bit. That's like the very broad basics. Again,
doesn't this also sort of eschew the fact that large swathes of economies are hoarded like a dragon would by certain institutions and certain individuals?
Yeah, but essentially, there is still a certain correlation between these activities. When, as we'll talk about, when the rates got really, 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 really low, like zero low post 2008, not as much of extra economic activity was created, but some was created. And this is essentially how all the models work. When the central banks set interest rates, and they do this every couple of weeks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Chinese Central Bank, and the UK Central Bank, these are some of the most important and critical updates in the world, because this is when the high priests, or the shadowy cabal, if you will, of money think the economy is going, and therefore it needs to be done. And every time these rate changes are announced,
and they fucking August and Doves to figure it out, right?
Yes, pretty close. In the run up to because they're every couple of weeks, in the run up to the next announcement, there's huge amounts of money and speculation being poured over what the next rate is going to be. They're wagering billions upon billions upon billions on the movement of the federal bank was interest rate, the UK central bank interest rate. All of this is there's insane amounts of money being bet on this because it is so crucial to the functioning of any modern economy. It is also in some countries, but not in others. The central bank is also the banking regulator that looks at banks and says you're actually a going concern and fine, or you're not. They sometimes get that spectacularly wrong, as in the case of the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, the Euro crisis, savings and loan crisis, and a whole bunch of others, because it's very difficult to determine what is actually valuable capital that can be traded in a crisis and what is a total piece of shit, as happens over and over and over and over and over again. And finally, and especially critically in the whole story that I want to start telling in a moment, it is also known as the lender of last resort, which means that when the commercial banking sector, when the normal finance sector completely shits the bed, the central bank is there to pick up the pieces. And it is presumed to always be trustworthy and always be manageable because the central bank itself is backed up by the existence of the nation state. The reason that everybody trusts the dollar and trusts the 10-year treasury notes is because they are backed up literally by what's called the full faith and credit of the United States, which means
okay.
It's just lies built on lies built on lies, and we all just need to keep believing that they're true so that they continue to exist. It's like the concept of a god in the Pratchett Discworld universe. When you stop believing in them, they just cease to exist.
Yes, I mean all of this. The whole thing is top to bottom based on trust. We trust that these institutions, central banks, will be there in the future and today to save us from our own stupidity. Once you stop clapping for it, the fairy does indeed die. That
feels like something of a weak point.
It is a fundamental weak point, and it's also one of the reasons why you get what we get. And this is actually a good point to start talking about. As David mentioned, this is
revolutions are all well and good, but has anyone ever considered just doom-pilling economists and bankers?
I mean, yeah, that could work. I mean, you do see it sometimes in in countries in South America, for example, where the elite has no faith in the central bank or in the local currency, and that's why they all transport all their money into dollars or euros, because they do believe them to be stable. Yeah, I mean, Argentina is a great case if you're looking for that kind of thing. But that's a whole sidetrack that I really can't get into. So anyway, as David said, this is like a part 1 of 2, because when I started writing the notes for this, I realized that I'd bitten off like vastly more than I can chew. So what I'm going to do from now until we get to Commentariat is give you a very brief, very, very brief, and probably pothole-filled history between 1987 and roughly 2013. I apologize, but I promise you, it is interesting and it is crucial to understanding the modern world.
I only assume that good things happened between those dates.
Only good things happened, and it's not like everything got progressively more insane. So I want to start in 1987 because of a specific policy change inside the US Federal Reserve, which is known as the Greenspan put. This is an incredibly important thing. It
sounds dangerously close to a putsch.
A put is a certain term of an instrument you can buy in the financial marketplace for trading purposes. But essentially what happens is it's instituted as a sort of policy design after the 1987 Black Monday crash on Wall Street, which is very convoluted and won't get into why it happened. Just let me assure you, there was a gigantic crash in Wall Street after too much fun was had in the economy.
Capitalism doing that thing again.
Yes, exactly. Capitalism having an escalating series of crises. I think somebody wrote a thing about that at some point.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah. So essentially what happens is, in a response to a series of interlocking failures in the economy and in the banking system, Alan Greenspan turns on the money hose, is the best way of putting it. So what he does is he says, okay, there's all these banks in trouble, and what they're not doing anymore is they're not loaning out money anymore because they're all in trouble. So what he does is turn on the money hose, and through the mechanisms of the central bank, like just shoves money out the door. At this time, it's only 17 billion, but at the time that represented about 7% of all dollars in circulation. So pretty much overnight, the Federal Reserve added an extra 7% of all the dollars in existence to the banking system, and essentially that helped.
Goes brr.
Yeah, printer goes brr on a scale. On a scale, probably, I don't know, I don't have all the numbers, but that probably hasn't been repeated until 2008, when we pump even more money into the economy. And the idea is money is scared, there's no confidence. What if we just flood more money into the system and then everything will be fine? Of course, the problem is the biggest lesson that the financial sector learned, and certainly the more speculative elements within it, is that when the crisis becomes big enough and starts to threaten the commanding heights of the economy, or things become too big to fail, central banks will be there to bail the system out and provide financial backstops. Yeah.
Is this what they call learned helplessness?
So this is essentially is a term you may have heard of before if you followed any news since 2008. What is known as moral hazard, which is a financial term, but essentially what it means is moral hazard is what happens when you take the fear of failure or the risk of failure out of parts of the system. Because if you always know that the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England will be there to bail you out of trouble because you're so important, why not put all your money into NFTs, or do stupid shit, or invest in the American housing market, or invest in pets.com? Because
conveniently, anyone that's ever actually dabbled in anything to do with a moral hazard will be charged with the same thing at the show trials.
The main problem is, and this is like a central, either a bug or a feature, depends on how you view these things. The way that this money is created, especially in the US, and I can't remember how it works in the UK at the moment, but I think it's similar, is the central bank doesn't create money and puts it into your account like your personal account, not like Rishi
I mean,
Sunak.
that was never going to happen, was it?
Yeah, I mean, not like the Rishi Sunak is, putting 200 quid into your account, but it's they put it in the hands of banks and trading firms, and they depend on them to sort of spread it out further throughout the economy.
Hey, you boy, you're good with money. It's $17 billion.
Yeah. In the US in particular, there's 24 firms which are known as primary dealers or primary brokers, and they are the only people who can.
Let me just contact my primary dealer to get some some assets from.
But they are the only people who have access to the Federal Reserve's magic money power creation, and they are then the people who are supposed
Rob, you missed a perfect opportunity to call it a magic money tree. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
but...
know. And the problem is, all these things, they only deal in assets, stocks, bonds, mortgages, all that stuff, and therefore it can only flow money into stocks, bonds, mortgages, and all assets that already exist. But the problem is the people who have assets are rich people. An asset is your house. If you don't have a house, you don't have an asset. An asset is the stock market. If you're not in the stock market, the Federal Reserve cannot directly connect with you and put more money into your lap, because you are then dependent on the people who do have assets to create new businesses or pay you more, for example.
I mean,
but what they tend to do essentially is not that.
Yeah, it absolutely could, because it's very easy for the central bank that's endorsed by the government of the nation to link directly in with the government of the nation that it's essentially linked to, and just fucking give everyone some money. They have your tax information. They can easily fucking distribute checks to everyone. They just won't. They
could.
They have.
Yeah. Although
they did in the US. That's been done, but they just will not do that shit.
I mean, I do think on that point I do think it is interesting that when you view this sort of a bit more holistically, in the sense of you bring the actual politics into it. This is part of why, a leftist can never be given the wheels of, the levers of power, because they could just, conceivably, they could just turn on the money hose and point it towards all the poor people. And God forbid that should fucking happen. We'll destroy capitalism by doing so, apparently.
Well, I mean, specifically...
Correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, just correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if you were to just turn on the money hose at people generally, the money would still be frightened because the money didn't get their money. That's the only reason the money would still be frightened.
Yeah, in a way. But Alistair, to answer your point specifically, this is part of the reason why Tony Blair and Gordon Brown made the Central Bank of England, the Bank of England, independent of the government. Because essentially, you're right. In the not so long ago, governments could and did do this kind of stuff. The central bank wasn't super important. They only became incredibly important for two reasons. First, they were all made independent, technically independent, but not really independent. And that gave capital and people with assets the confidence that exactly the government wouldn't put money in your pocket, because that would be bad, because that might create inflation and that might erode the value of the assets they hold today. So
Smaug in the Times saying that they cannot turn the money hose on the poor.
Yeah, pretty much exactly. There was another piece in the Telegraph as well about why we shouldn't be doing zero emissions by 2050, because it might make the money scared and it might cause inflation. So it's that kind of stuff. So what happens is essentially, because the central banks are incredibly powerful but only have these limited tools and can only work through banks and assets, this is part of, and I think very fundamental to the reason why you have this incredible gap between rich people and poor people, because rich people have been living on an asset bubble for the last 40 years, because every time there was a crisis in the US economy or in the global economy, central banks have just been pumping more and more money into the system. This Greenspan put was just repeated over and over again. It happened specifically during the US savings and loan banking crisis in 1988.
Well, when you've got a good idea, you want to make sure it gets out there. You want to keep hammering that dead horse until it's no more money is spurting out.
I mean, specifically, they did it the first time during the U.S. savings and loan banking crisis of 1987. They did it again during the first Gulf War when the money got scared again. So that was 91 or 92, I want to say. They did it again in the Mexican-American peso crisis in 94, the Asian financial crisis in 97, the fall of long-term capital management, which is an episode in and of itself, in 1998. They did it again in the dot-com crisis in 2000, and it would happen again on a much, much grander and much more interesting scale in 2008. So essentially what happens every time is the financial system shits the bed and the central banks of the Western world run up to them full of wheelbarrows of cash and say, "Oh, are you feeling bad?"
Yeah, they run up to them with the wheelbarrow full of cash and ignore those contradictions. Those contradictions don't exist anymore. Just focus on the money.
Yeah. Wouldn't you just like to feel quantitatively eased?
Yes, exactly. Well, quantitative easing is what we're going to get into very quickly, because that is incredibly important to understanding the modern economy. So now we're up to 2008, the great financial crisis, and it's very important that essentially between 1980 and certainly up to 2008, most Western countries, since we all became good neoliberals, most governments actively don't think they have any role to play in the economy, and that it would actually be bad for them if they tried to do it. This is part of Milton Friedman's thinking, saying essentially the economy is a machine so incredibly complex that if you, the government, interfere, you never know what you're doing, and the outcome is much more likely to be bad than it is good. Therefore, the government should never intervene, because you would put a perfectly tuned machine that is just about distributing resources. You would...
Economists just wish they had like proper jobs, don't they? Do you know what I mean? It's like literally just flouncing about the place in a wizard hat and a robe, going, "Oh, the money feels bad today." All this sort of shit. Pondering orbs in towers and all that sort of bollocks. But they crack on as if they're running a fucking nuclear reactor. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, we can't have any idiot pushing buttons on the control panel. There could be a meltdown. Do you know what I mean? It's like as if they know anything.
And also, despite the frequent appearance of meltdowns, we keep saying to them, "You must know things. You can build very complex Excel sheets."
We can't get this guy in. He's an expert in meltdowns.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Those meltdowns just happen sometimes, and it's lucky they're there to make sure they weren't any worse. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, unironically, Ben Bernanke was himself and is an expert on the Great Depression of 1929. So he had the wizard robe and hat of meltdowns when the meltdown happened.
The economy's going to shit, so I put on my robe and wizard hat.
So, back to so this is incredibly important, right? Because, as I said before, the central banks are incredibly important, but they can't do everything. And the things they can't do, for the most part, is like redistributive things, because that's fiscal policy. And we've essentially, as Western nations, given up on fiscal policy. Like, when's the last time rich people were taxed more so we could pay for, things, common assets that belong to everybody, or stuff like that? Like, that shit's completely out of the question. Witness the insane sort of level of debates we get when, I think it was Ed Miliband still said, yeah, we should put the highest tax rate back up, the highest band to 50p, and everybody shit the fucking bed. It's essentially because... most people and economics commentators on the whole, and certainly like the financial institutions, have said, no, you can't do fiscal policy because that's always bad because then the money gets scared.
Change can never be positive. It can only be bad.
Yes. So while the direct cause in 2008 of the great financial crisis is the US housing market and all the shenanigans, collateralized debt obligations, synthetic obligations, all that stuff, that's not the point of this podcast. I hope you know a bit about this by now. But it's essentially part of a much larger canvas of a world increasingly where people, because they don't have increasing incomes, are much more reliant on debt and credit cards. weak trade unions. There's a shift of manufacturing from Western countries to Asia and China in particular. An aging boomer population with medical bills and squatting like vampires on the housing market, all that stuff. So there's a huge sort of, all these things come together to create a gigantic global crisis. So
It really took the whole team working together to fuck this one up, lads.
it genuinely, it really did.
I mean, the root of that and every other financial crisis is that money isn't real. Do you know what I mean? You're just letting a bunch of fucking sorcerers pretend like they know actual magic, and they don't, because it isn't real. You could just take all the stuff we've got and we could just like share it out, and everyone could have a house and some food, but we just don't do that because, like, Star Trek's for communists or some shit. You know what I mean? It's science fiction to imagine that we have enough resources on planet Earth to house and feed everyone, and not need to fucking twat around just so Alan Sugar can have fucking a TV show and own half of London.
Yeah, pretty much.
We must immiserate the fucking very poorest among us, because otherwise, a line wouldn't go up on a fucking fictional chart somewhere. GDP. What about the GDP? It's like, what about it? You just made that up. It's not a real thing. It stops existing as soon as nobody's looking at it. It's not like a shed somewhere where you can go every day. You can walk up a hill and look at it and go, oh, that's still there. It's just made up. You might as well worry about Game of Thrones or some shit. It's just as real as the economy. You know what I mean?
We all live inside EVE Online, except we don't even get to fucking look at the spaceships.
Yeah. Basically that. EVE Online is just as real as the real economy, except they get spaceships to look at.
Yeah, and I mean, and also even more financial shenanigans. I don't really care about EVE Online, but if I read something about it, it always involves people stealing more money than God, which always strikes me as quite funny. Anyway, so the most critical thing that happens in the crunch days of the 2008 financial crisis, when it we were very, very close to having a 1929 style event where things would have completely shit the bed, and money would have stopped coming out of the ATM machines, out of the cash dispensers. It was, at some points, it was that hairy. And the most critical thing that happened, because this is all magic and pixie dust, was a loss of trust, because banks were and are very dependent on borrowing money from each other on very short, overnight terms, to keep their books in balance and everything. And they started
becoming... podcasts work the same way.
And they started becoming very afraid that if they loaned money to Northern Rock or Lehman Brothers or Goldman Sachs or other institutions, that they wouldn't get their money back, because Christ knows if the next bank falls over tomorrow, all that money you've lent to them, even on a 24 or 48 hour cycle, might go up in smoke or get locked up in a million lawsuits. So what happens is there's two things that happen. The first thing happens in the midst of this, and without democratic discussion or oversight. The Fed in particular, but also the UK Central Bank, less so the European Central Bank, because it was very stupid at the time, and lots of other things. What happens is the Fed creates a whole bunch of different facilities, new ones. They were called Maiden Lane and others, and their purpose was to inject money straight into the banks. And the way they did this, and this is something they'd never really done before, is they said to all these banks that were about to keel over because they had so many shitty mortgage debt and shitty assets on their books, they said to them, show us the heaping pile of stinking garbage that you have assembled on your books, and we'll take it and we'll
funnel it directly into my mouth. Yum, 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 yum.
Yes, exactly. And then, smiling with a mouth full of dog shit, they said, would you like crisp...
Do you like funneling hot dog shit? Yeah, the Fed does
work the same way.
Yeah. And they would swap them.
They should change the Fed strapline to that.
And they would swap them for either straight US dollars or other very easily tradable instruments. And the idea was, and it did work to some degree, depending on how you define it did work. The idea was, okay,
can I define Can I define did work as kept this whole stack of bullshit like plates spinning for just another like while longer until they thought of something else?
Yes, pretty much.
Cool. How did you possibly guess that?
So, according to one of the books I cited before, Lords of Easy Money, the U.S. Federal Reserve alone creates $1.2 trillion out of nowhere and dumps them into the economy via these 24 prime broker institutions. This is as opposed to all the other money they ever created in the previous century and, doled out either during regular times or during crisis, which was about inflation corrected to 850 billion. So, like, in a couple of years, they created 50% more money than ever existed in the century before. And
so everyone was 50% richer, right?
Yes, weren't you made 50% richer? Didn't you feel that much more, valuable in the years after? I certainly did.
Since starting this podcast, my memory doesn't go back further than like 3 days, so I assume that it did.
I think that's called a defense mechanism.
Well, I mean, the idea of... so by comparison, anyway, the Obama stimulus, if you remember back to that time, which was incredibly discussed and perceived negatively by the Republicans because it was state intervention and all that whole shit, was like a big topic in the papers. But what the Federal Reserve alone did was 50% bigger than that. But literally... well, not literally, but outside the Financial Times and like a handful of other nerds, nobody talked about this. And there was no democratic decision ever made to say, A, should we be saving the banks? And B, how should we saving them? And C, once we save them, what do we do with them? Because the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, because they've also assembled about 900 billion worth of money on their books in the last 20 odd years.
I mean,
was this ever up for democratic debate or control? No.
I mean, it's just like going up to a guy who's like, has a guy's trying to sell you NFTs, and you just say to this guy, "Oh, how much are these NFTs worth?" And he's like, "Oh, well, $100 million each. And if you don't buy them, then I'm going to have to burn the rainforest down even more." And It's like, oh, well, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. I best give him $100 million.
Well, and the analogy is more like this guy is too important to other wizards that we can't just shoot him in the head.
It's just so fucking frustrating when it's... I mean, like Jamie says, it's keeping the machine chugging along and until the next fucking crisis, and at no point does anyone consider whether or not it's the right thing to do, and just completely absolving any sort of responsibility of those who actually start this whole fucking thing. And just...
No, well, on the one hand, you've got like the endless and like fucking unceasing crises of capitalism and, like, you know what I mean, the economy just piling up throughout history. But on the other hand, you've got Venezuela, lol, trillions dead. Do you know what I mean? So it's impossible to say which system works better.
So at this time, there's one other very, very important thing that happens, which had never happened before, if I remember correctly, in the history of the modern central bank, is they go to what is known as the zero bound, which is the 0% interest rate. This meant that essentially banks could go to the central bank and borrow money for free because they didn't have to pay any interest on it. And that means the idea that the Federal Reserve had is if we give banks more free money, they won't be so worried about the quality of stuff they're loaning it out to. Therefore, they'll, Goldman Sachs or Barclays will be able to give you a loan to start your widget business, and that will restart the economy.
Famously, this was not anything to do with the cause of the problem in the first place.
No, absolutely not. It already wasn't. I mean, the problem was because of the Greenspan put. where they were already shoveling money into the financial system every time there was a crisis. One of the things that Greenspan also did was lower the interest rate. So the interest rate was already much, much lower than it had been, but now it really comes close to zero. And the thing is, it has stayed at or near zero, depending, or even went negative in some cases, for nearly a decade. So roughly between 2010 and now, the interest rate for banks to borrow money from the central bank has been pretty much zero. And not only has it been zero, a lot of central banks said out loud to the finance community that they would keep it there for a good long while. This is known as forward guidance, i.e. they were tipping their hands and saying, look, you see this gigantic pile of infinite free money that we can create. It's going to be around for a really long time. So you guys can just fill your fucking boots. And then we rely on you, gigantic financial institutions, to trickle this money down towards the real economy so real human beings can get a better job. And that is, of course, what happened.
Yep, definitely.
I want to go a little bit further because I want to talk a little bit about quantitative easing, because this is one of these concepts that's been floating around for years, and I do think that's incredibly important to understand what it is that mechanism is particular, and also place it in its sort of temporal context.
Is it free money for dipshits?
Yes, but in specific and interesting ways.
Obviously they have to be rich dipshits. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
No one's turning up at my house to quantitatively ease me.
So it's no coincidence that this new mechanism dreamed up by the Federal Reserve at first, but then taken over by the Bank of England, the European Central Bank and other institutions in about 2010, because this is, if you remember, in 2010 is when the Tea Party Republicans take back the House of Congress in the United States, and David Cameron and George Osborne arrive in number 10. And that essentially kills off stone dead the idea of government fiscal intervention or active government policy stimulus to kickstart the economy. So the central banks at this point knew that they were the only game left in town, the only serious game left in town that could keep the whole show on the road. Whether or not the show was good or not is really not under discussion. The show just
but by
must go
God, the
on.
show must go on.
Yes. And the problem is, even though we're 2 years after the financial crisis in the US, but we're still in the middle of the the Euro crisis, and Western economies overall are incredibly slow and sluggish, and they're not recovering in the way that the models had predicted, which is weird because
flashback to that fucking central bank growth predictions for like the last 15 years.
Exactly, it's exactly that. So demand is not picking up as people had projected. People are still losing their jobs. Banks still aren't lending to small and medium businesses, and the stock market, worryingly, is also starting to slide. And this is already, despite, you must remember that the interest rate is already pretty much at zero or even slightly negative, and therefore banks have no financial incentive to save. So what the banks should have been doing was putting money out into the real economy because it was free. But what instead they were doing was building a giant casino, about which a little bit more later. So what happens in 2010, there's a series of meetings inside the Federal Reserve where the process of quantitative easing with some minor pushback is adopted. It's reasonably simple, essentially. It's about injecting huge amounts of shiny, fresh, new digital money through the 24 primary dealers. And, I talked about them before. They're the biggest banks in the world. Goldman Sachs is one. Citigroup is one. It's all the 24 biggest, most reliable institutions in the US are these things.
Reliable, trustworthy institutions. Every single one.
Yes, they also strongly correlate to too big to fail, but there's absolutely no direct relation between those two, of course. One of them definitely is Goldman Sachs. I'll just take them as the example. So what happens is the Federal Reserve rings up the Goldman Sachs guy and says, I want to buy 10 billion of US treasuries, which are in your account. I want to buy them, and I'll just give you straight cash for them. So Goldman Sachs says, yeah, sure, why not? And what happens is the Fed credits the Goldman Sachs account that they have with them for $10 billion fresh dollars, and the US treasuries are moved into the book of the Federal Reserve. So this creates for Goldman Sachs $10 billion of fresh new money that they can now go out and loan out or buy other assets with, like stocks and that kind of stuff, and thereby stimulating the economy. So this is it's essentially just a straight swap. The central banks start approaching major financial institutions and saying, do you have any reasonably solid good stuff on your book? And then you have to think specifically of UK gilts, so state bonds, 10 years is the most common one, US treasuries, bonds issued by the German government, all that stuff, and we'll just take it off your hand, park it on a balance sheet, and here's a lot of fresh, lovely new money that you can go out and do stuff in the real economy with. So the initial buy of this was $600 billion US dollars. Again, this was never discussed democratically, and nobody said, hey, with $600 billion US dollar at the time, we could probably pretty much resolve climate change as is. No, it was just funneled into the finance system because this is the only way that central banks know how to do their thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's because the political establishment is as self-perpetuating of capital as the financial system, right? They're like so closely interlinked, and it's like, so closely interlinked, even though these central banks are meant to be independent, whatever the fuck that means. Like, they're all just going to and this is sort of where to me at least, the shadowy cabal is is a bit of a fucking meme, because it's not necessarily these individuals saying we are going to perpetuate the institutions, like financial institutions and capital C capital. It's just, this is what happens when you have a system that wants to keep itself alive, and there's no way that any regular person can do anything to stop it. And anyone who does try to do something to change this system is met with just overwhelming force in order to stop them from affecting the machine perpetuating itself.
Yeah,
because are you trying to insinuate that these are structural issues?
That might have come up at some point.
Even at the time, inside the Federal Reserve, they have their own research and say that this initial buy of $600 billion US dollars would probably only cut employment by 0.03%. Now, in the context of the US, that's 750,000 jobs. So, that's not...
I mean, it's not nothing, but, dude, come on. 600 billion, you've got to be joking.
Yeah, so the going rate, if you do very quick and dirty math, is about 8,000 US dollars per job created. However, you could, of course, say that had, we not done this shenanigans of making fake money, giving it to a bank to do more asset shit with instead of...
If I was money right now, I'd be getting the heebie-jeebies, because you're saying don't give the banks the money, and that's just not right.
But, by stark contrast, what happened after the Great Depression under Roosevelt, for example, is they just made government programs to do actual things, and that put money directly into the hands of the people who worked for them. But we're not allowed to do that anymore. We have to do it through the magic black box machine, because that's the only way we know how to make the system work.
That's the massive fucking distinction between dealing with a huge financial crisis that is actually materially affects the country and the financial machine, because in Roosevelt's fucking programs are what built the fucking Hoover Dam, for example, infrastructure, these things that pay for themselves so many hundreds, thousands of times over because of the sheer utility of building a railway, building a road, things of that nature. Whereas you just throw money into fucking Smaug's, hoard. It's just, literally throwing good money bad money after bad money, I guess.
Well, it's not just like Smaug's hoard. It's more like, what if there were 4 Smaugs and they were just throwing money between each other and making it do more every time they threw it.
It's just a bigger pool for Scrooge McDuck to piss himself in.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and there's one like additional critical piece to this business of quantitative easing, which is essentially, again, like I said, it's just central banks going up to very big financial institutions and playing swappity-doo, saying, you give me some of the assets on your books and I will just give you fresh money that you can go out and spend and buy yourself something nice, like stocks. The thing they start buying is long-term stable state debt, gilts, UK gilts, German bonds, US treasuries. But the problem is these are essentially saving instruments for banks and pension funds and others because they are so perceived to be so safe, right? You can buy US treasuries 10 years, no problem, because you trust and assume that in 10 years the United States will still be there. And you buy and trade UK gilts on the assumption that in 10 years the UK government will still be around to honor its debts. Germany is the same, it's all the same. Like, that's why these things are, the pool of them, there's an incredible amount of them, and they're very liquid because everybody trades them and everybody wants to have them. And they're incredibly safe to have. So what happens with this process of quantitative easing is two things. Not only do they push fresh money into the money supply, but they also take a lot of the safest stuff that is out there in the world out of the market because they vanish onto the central bank book and they hold them
enter
there.
The hoard.
They enter the hoard of the central bank. And what happens, therefore, is that pension funds, banks, like people with a load of money that want to, or in case like pension funds need to make real returns to give to their shareholders and pensioners and all that stuff. They are therefore much more forced to, instead of just sitting on their own hoard of treasuries or gilts, they have to go out and find quote unquote real economy projects to invest in. So the idea is, and those are always a little bit more, like those are always more risky. A bet on, I don't know, IBM or Microsoft is very good, but it's not as good as betting that the United States will still exist in 10 years, if you get my
Inshallah.
Yeah, I mean, now it's all getting a bit funky, but, you know, that's at least the theory of it. So what happens is all these big financial institutions, flush with fresh money and also bereft of very safe assets, start looking further out into slightly riskier assets to put their money
taking my huge wads of money wrapped up in rubber bands and wearing my like skimpiest outfit as I walk down the street and just like look at things to throw, like big bins to throw the money into.
Yeah, but, and this is incredibly important to me, is the qualifier is in all of this is this kind of stuff really only works if banks aren't loaning out money already to consumers or not investing in useful things. Because that's the only way it works, right? You give this money to the banks because you think, okay, they're not loaning out enough money for you to start Widget Co. or to invest in useful things like solar panels or, you know, what have you. But that wasn't what's going on. It was that the real economy after the 1980s and Thatcherism and the collapse of wages was just clapped out, right? People didn't have savings anymore. The jobs that were good are shit. Labor is much more casualized. So individual people either couldn't or wouldn't borrow money because they didn't have a good job anymore, so they didn't have the prospect of paying it back. And the same goes for a lot of companies. But there was a very categorical mistake made, and Bernanke himself says so he betrays himself in an op-ed that he wrote at the time. He said, quantitative easing will help consumers by creating more wealth for those consumers because the price of stocks and shares will rise. Thereby, of course, not acknowledging the reality is that the vast majority of people don't own any stocks and shares. So this trick only works.
That guy's an economist, and so has probably never met a normal person in his life. Do you know what I mean? Living in a fucking decrepit tower in a like enchanted forest somewhere, and just like pondering
perfectly
people from
frictionless
afar
room
through an orb. You know what I mean? Like He doesn't know what normal people are like. He just assumes they've all got stocks because why would they not? Stocks are great.
And his mates all do have them. The people he would associate with in
perfectly spherical orbs moving through perfectly frictionless rooms.
Yeah. I mean,
do you know what I mean? It's like he assumes everyone also has a really pointy hat with a giant floppy brim because everyone he knows wears one.
Yeah, exactly.
The central bank staff has a knob at the end.
Yeah.
So what they were doing is they were making a huge and fundamental category mistake because a generation of personally wealthy bankers badly misjudged what was going on. So what they ended up doing is attacking a demand side problem, i.e. nobody has any more money, the jobs are going and we're fucked, with why don't we just supply more money to you but that you can't really touch or access because there's a misalignment between a central bank that can only deal in assets and you not having any assets. So
it really is fun how many of the fucking just the fucking inherent contradictions we've just gone over just talking about the central bank, because it's pretty much, it feels like most of them, if not all.
Yeah,
just not giving workers any fucking money to buy any of the widgets and all the doodahs, and we keep giving money to the banks, but the peasants won't spend any of their money. What's going on?
I mean, from what I'm reading here, Rob, it sounds very much like, you've got the real economy, which you said, and then you've got the fake one where all the stocks are and shit. And that one's still, even to this day, really overinflated in fucking value.
Yeah, and getting bigger and bigger because since 2000, starting in 87, but ramping up massively since 2008, and during the Rona years, it got even fucking weirder, but that's for part two. We've just been injecting more money into the asset class, so stocks and shares and all that kind of shit. So, that's why that gap gets between the stock market and the real economy gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because in a significant proportion, it's not absolute, but in a significant portion, that depends and is reliant on central banks just shoveling more and more money into the furnace and stoking the engine hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, which of course can't ever be a problem. But in terms of trying to using this mechanism to fix your personal, very real income problems is incredibly inefficient and doesn't really work. I quite like the analogy Mark Blythe uses on this, that what QE was trying to do is you want to make a cup of tea, and instead of filling the kettle with the tap, what you do is you stick a fire hose through your mailbox front door and then turn it on and then wait until the fire hose hits the kettle enough so you can make a cup of tea. There are more efficient ways of doing this, but those efficient ways of doing it absolutely 100% depend on the central bank and an active government to make fiscal choices. You need both parts, otherwise you get this weird shit.
Yeah.
But we have governments that refuse to do this. And looking forward a little bit, if you remember, it was months ago, we did an episode on one of Starmer's stupid speeches to the CBI, where he said one of the most important things we will do is fiduciary duty. And that was essentially saying, no, don't worry, we won't touch fiscal policy either. This will just stay around today.
Well, thank God for that assurance of not solving any of the fucking problems.
Yeah,
See,
you
this
ponder
whole
the money,
thing-
I'll ponder the loom.
Yeah, this whole thing where you give money to the banks and they just spaff it all up the wall on fucking, do you know what I mean? Gazing at runes or whatever the fuck the stock market involves. Do you know? Because it's they could give that money out in loans to normal people, but then you wouldn't see as high a return on your investment. So they're morally bound by the Bushido code of capitalism to not do that. And it's the economy just keeps getting worse. But it's that's why every fucking company is desperate to get into crypto and NFTs and stuff, because it's you go, all right, okay, we've done an NFT of Ronald McDonald fucking shagging Grimace, and everyone goes holy fuck, and it's suddenly it's worth $11 billion, and then you didn't actually have to do anything for that. You've made $11 billion happen out of nowhere. You know what I mean?
Worth noting that $11 billion is equivalent to one Wes coin.
But yeah, no, I mean,
But yeah,
Jamie,
it's like, you know what I mean. It's just all we've made some numbers on the sheet look better. You know what I mean. We've got a higher score in Excel than we've ever had before. So we must be doing something right. And it's just fucking ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? What we should do is we should just hand like all the banks and everything over. Like they can just do crypto, right? They can just have like a fucking like a spreadsheet online.
Well, no, Jamie, sorry. What they need EVE Online. Just get the fucking bankers into EVE Online. They can
EVE Online, EVE Online, but on the blockchain, yeah. And then they can just fuck about with like their imaginary magic number as much as they want, while all the actual like money we can just spend on like fucking houses and food. That sounds much better. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
They just need to embrace the fact that like the number in their computer is entirely fictional and they can make it say whatever they fucking want. They don't need to hoard all of the goods and services on planet Earth in order to make that number go up. Do you know what I mean? You can just delete it and type a new number.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, essentially in the case of NFTs, and I wanted to sort of talk about that a little bit already, is you only get dumb shit like NFTs and like a lot of the stuff that like Trash Future talks about, like all the blood startups and the Juiceros and all the Web3 bullshit we're getting now. You only get this because there's so much money sloshing around and it's all desperate to earn a return. They all need to make their money and then some on top of it. And all like the safe stuff is either boring or doesn't make enough money quick enough. So you end up with Tesla and NFTs and Bitcoin.
Well, it's because you can't get enough rubes involved, isn't it?
Because while it might be a fucking stupid tulip mania of an idea, you have free money, you might as well bet it, and the chance of you making an absolute killing, either via, Bored Apes going mental or, the theory of a company like Uber, which is, what if we kill all the taxi companies, we're the only game in town, and then we can do with the price what we want. That's how you get into these weird situations.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you've got a bunch of free money from the central bank, you might as well spend it on, like, fucking magic beans or some shit. Because if the magic beans actually sprout a beanstalk and you kill a giant, you'd be the first person ever to do that, and it would look fucking mint as publicity. You know what I mean? Everyone would love you forever, and they'd want to buy more magic beans from you. And if it turns out that that's like a fucking stupid thing that only an idiot who believes in fairy tales would ever conceive of, well, it doesn't matter that you've wasted all that money because the central bank will just give you more so that the economy doesn't suffer.
Yeah. So, and in briefly coming back to, like, and if you think there was the magic money tree, there definitely is, because just to come back to the UK for a moment.
Of course there is, because whenever anyone says, oh, there's no magic money tree, the part they're not saying, but is heavily implied, is for you.
Yeah, but specifically, the US Federal Reserve is not the only people who do this quantitative easing stuff. The ECB does it, a whole bunch of people do it, including the UK Central Bank, which has acquired, this is from their own website, £895 billion worth of stuff, of which 875 billion is gilts, so is treasury certificates that the UK government has issued. So a lot of the standard operating expenses and the investments, however dumb and stupid and in fact the Tories have done since 2010, have been funded and are now owned by the Bank of England. So essentially what you have is a situation where the UK government spends money and in order to do so issues gilts, which are bought by another part of the UK government, which just sticks it in a big black hole and says, thank you very much. And that's not a problem.
Is that good?
Well, I mean, if you were to have a socialist government, for example, you could use the same trick. But what's going to happen is in the financial markets is they're not going to say, oh, this is very wise and a good idea in quantitative easing. They're going to say, that's socialism. And then it's bad.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we've seen that fucking game before, isn't it? It's bad now, but it's good when our guys doing it. It's bad when their guys doing it. Yeah. And it's just...
It's good as long as it's an infinite money shovel towards already wealthy people. It's bad when it's used to buy your area a nice new park or a playground. It does work that way.
I mean, it is like it was something, I can't remember who said it, but like essentially blaming the financial crash, like, you know, austerity, but blaming the financial crash on opening like a library in like Wolverhampton or whatever.
Yeah, it is along those lines. So where we are now, or where we'll sort of leave the story, is, because I promise you we're wrapping up to the end of part one of this, is we create a world where people with assets and with money are growing ever more galactically rich, and stupid startups and things like, I don't know, the new version of pets.com or the metaverse, for Christ's sake, get incredible valuations, and you get shit like Uber. Because, like, Uber creates jobs, so politicians can say, yeah, you know, we created all these new jobs. The jobs are fucking shit, but that doesn't matter, because even though the workers don't get a salary bump, the shares in Uber still go up because there's free money around. So according to the statistics nerds and the spreadsheet people,
the problem is gamification. Do you know what I mean? But like they don't realize that that's what it is. It's that, like, you know, once upon a time it was like you looked at how many people were unemployed and you went, oh, that's bad, because like people who are unemployed don't have any money and they're not spending that money, and that money, so there's not enough money circulating through the economy. So we need to create more jobs so that these people will have more money and then they'll circulate through the economy. And that's just been abstracted down to this number should be lower. So now you just like go, right, okay, like, is this guy, he's on a 0 hours contract and most weeks he doesn't work. Then but he counts as employed though, so the number went down.
But he did. But
I mean, it's just an obfuscation of like what is the ultimate goal of capital, which is to make workers so essentially so destitute and desperate that they'll take any job at any salary, and the unemployment is by its own existence a demonstration to people who are employed that things could be worse. You should be grateful for the like pitiful job that you've got right now. And what we're kind of seeing is like a blurring of that line of, so you've got to sort of marry having as many people unemployed as possible, but also having as few people unemployed as possible so that the number looks good. So what if we just have jobs that are so shit they are tantamount to being unemployed? And for some reason, someone gets incredibly rich off of this. Yeah. This is a win-win.
And it does one other thing, which is incredibly important, this specific situation, because you have to remember the interest rates are incredibly low, is you also create a whole generation that doesn't have any income, it doesn't have any money, but how does it participate in a consumer society and buy a house or, you know, pay the rent or you know, go on holiday, that kind of shit? How they do that is with debt. And that's why personal debt is incredibly high now. Like personal credit card debt, unsecured credit card debt, car loan debt, all that stuff is through the fucking roof. And that's because you have created this peonage situation where nobody has money and nobody has a wage, but is expected to be a consumer in the modern economy. And the only way that this whole thing goes is if there is enough very low interest debt on your personal credit card that you can, I'm not even going to say like live your fantasies and go on holiday every other week, but for you just to pay the fucking groceries. That's the other flip side of this, and that's also very strongly related to keeping these interest rates so incredibly low. Another corollary when we're talking about borrowing is some of this money went out from the central bank to, let's say, Goldman Sachs, to big companies like Boeing and others. But what they did with it was, instead of investing in new plants and hiring people and building widgets, was they did a lot of share buybacks. Essentially, they borrowed a shit ton of money to buy their own shares, which made the outstanding ones more expensive, which therefore was a reward to shareholders and the executives who are given big bonuses on the basis of the value of the share price. And since the great financial crisis, so since 2008, this is according to a very good documentary I watched on Frontline called The Power of the Fed, which you should look up and watch as well. They put $6 trillion since the global financial crisis has gone into these buybacks. But this means that the balance sheets of a lot of major corporations are now loaded with these corporate debts. And those are all dependent on low interest rates staking around forever. So a very minor uptick Like a very small uptick is enough to blow up a lot of these very funny trash future startups. A slightly larger uptick might very well kill off Boeing or Dell or Christ knows who, because it's all phantom growth. It's all
the fake money was extra fake.
Yes, because fake money begat fake share prices, begat a fake economy. Anyway.
Love it.
Monopoly money all the way down,
that's
baby.
What we're getting into in the next episode, then.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because if you thought this was already weird and fucked, wait until you see what happens when Corona hits the global economy.
Oh yeah, I'm sure like perfectly normal things and reasonable adjustments, etc. Yeah.
Please, sir, my economy, it's very sick.
All right then, let's round this fucker off before we rejoin it in behind the paywall.
Return to the mortal plane, shall we?
Yeah, with some comment or commentariat.
Yeah, but hopefully
so
a commentary at any % speed run. Let's go.
Commentary out, comment.
No, we're not doing that game now. Right. When my daughter turns 2 years old, she will not be masked at preschool. This is unmovable for our family and a deal breaker. I know what impact being out in public and trying to communicate with people masked has had on my life. Comment or commentariat.
Commentariat. Is this Alison Pearson in the Telegraph?
It's not Alison Pearson, no.
Did they say the daughter would be at school at 2?
Preschool.
Oh, preschool. Okay. Commentariat.
That was commentariat. It was Meghan McCain in the Daily Mail.
In the Daily Mail? What's she doing over here?
Is she branching out?
Fuck knows. I'm assuming because like Mail Online gets a mad amount of readership in the US.
That's true.
That's probably why she's featured in there.
Was the first paragraph my father, McCain Senior, the war criminal?
I didn't actually notice a single mention of him, so she's obviously starting to do better. So
she must be very ill.
Personal growth. Well, one can hope. Moving on. I'm not sure I believe Boris, but I do believe in him. Remember, the vast majority voted him in, knowing that he could be a naughty boy, and against many predictions, he produced a stonking majority. Would you like his job? I don't think so. He hasn't been allowed to govern, having to deal with 2 years of unprecedented situations outside his control. So
that
before we hound him out of office, I think he deserves another chance. Comment or commentariat?
Right. The next person who writes or says the words stonking majority, I'm going to hit them in the face with a hammer. Comment.
Commentariat, that's got to be.
Commentariat.
That was commentariat, and you will never fucking guess who. Would be here for hours, and you would never guess. It was again the Daily Mail, and this was Anthony Worrell Thompson.
Whoa! Okay.
I thought that cunt had died.
Yeah.
I thought he wasn't around either, but apparently he is. Unless maybe the Daily Mail just has the rights to his name and face or some shit.
This must be how like Darth Vader feels when like Obi-Wan turns up on the Death Star. Do you know what I mean? Like fucking hell, that cunt's still alive.
Is he the one that got done for shoplifting, or was that a different TV show?
No, that was him. He was done for shoplifting.
Ah, brilliant. Okay, now
he shoplifted wine and cheese from a Tesco.
just to feel something.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. Even when he seems to suspect he is being lied to, all he will do is get his guests to repeat whatever it is they've said and say, really, wow, that's interesting. This is the way non-confrontational men tend to communicate when they socialise in groups. Over the last 2 years, I've listened to hundreds of hours of the Joe Rogan Experience. Comment or commentary.
Comment.
I don't know. Comment. Yeah, why not?
Should we rebrand as a non-confrontational podcast and just go, yes, that's interesting to each other?
Oh, that was commentariat. That was Damien Riley in The Spectator.
Never heard of him.
Me
Fuck
neither.
that guy.
No, so that was a lovely gift. Right, last one. Back in the 90s, reading food packets for junk ingredients was a typical left-wing hobby. Many of the opinions that were held by the left-leaning devotees of mung beans and carob in my youth have become the preserve of the right, and especially of its weirder online subcultures. Comment or commentary.
Is this another? Have you given us like a like a 4p of commentary?
Have I hit my head?
This if this is commentary, I'm trying to think which pricks were young in the 90s that are like fucking, you know what I mean, writing this sort of shit today.
These are the this sounds like the kind of person that was surprised that like hippie, hyper individualistic, free love type people ended up being like massive fucking right wingers as they got older.
Oh, is it Caitlin Moran? Yeah, that's my guess.
Right, okay, you're saying commentariat. Yep. Oops, all commentariat. That was Mary Harrington writing for the Cow website.
A fine pick.
So yeah, that was comment or commentariat, except it was all commentariat. Yeah, so hope you enjoyed that. So
why would you hope that?
It's like going for ice cream and getting all syrup.
Setting yourself up for disappointment by hoping that.
No, I would hope you enjoyed that because it was a very painful 45 minutes trying to fucking dig all this shit out. So I would like to think it wasn't entirely for fuck all. Speaking of things that were entirely for fuck all, if you would like to hear the second part of this episode where we talk about central banking, you check it out the Patreon. It will be out by next week. It will be out next week, and you will have that on the feed for £5 a month. More if you'd like to, but you don't have to. And we will be streaming some Mondays for the rest of the month, and definitely Thursdays for the rest of the month. That's twitch.tv/praxiscast. And yeah,
except this week when we're recording.
Except today, if you're listening to this on Thursday.
Oh, yeah,
we got this out on Thursday,
today.
and you're listening to it on Thursday. And if you can find them, maybe the A team can help. Forgot where I was going at the start of that. Oh yeah, we're not streaming this week. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, we'll catch you later.
Yeah, we'll see you on the
Goodbye.
Patreon for part 2.
Yep. Cheerio.
See ya.
Bye.